The rain hammered against the windows of Station 47 with relentless fury, turning the pre-dawn darkness into a wall of sound and shadow. Inside the brick building on the outskirts of Millbrook County, North Carolina, the crew had settled into the quiet rhythm of a night shift winding down. The coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen, the television murmured low in the common room, and the diesel engines of the truck sat silent in their bays, waiting. Ethan Rodriguez stood at the kitchen counter, pouring his third cup of coffee at 4:47 a.m. At 32, he'd been with the department for 9 years, long enough to know that the quietest nights often turned chaotic without warning. His dark hair was still damp from the shower he'd taken after their last call, a minor car accident on Route 15 that had ended with nothing more than a twisted bumper and shaken nerves. The sound came so suddenly that Ethan thought he'd imagined it. A heavy, uneven thud, thud, thud against the concrete outside the station's main entrance. Then another and another. Not the rhythm of footsteps or the rumble of a vehicle, something else entirely, something that didn't belong in the middle of a rainstorm at 5 in the morning. "You hear that?" Blake Thornton called from the apparatus bay, where he'd been checking equipment. At 26, Blake was the youngest on their shift, still eager and sharp-eyed despite the hour. Ethan set down his mug and moved toward the sound. Carter Hayes emerged from the bunk room, pulling on his station uniform shirt over his undershirt. At 41, Carter was the senior man on shift, a veteran with grey threading through his brown hair and eyes that had seen too many bad calls to be easily surprised. The thuds came again, weaker this time, almost pleading. "Someone banging on the door?" Carter muttered, reaching for the switch that controlled the exterior lights. "Doesn't sound like hands," Ethan said, already moving toward the entrance. He pulled open the heavy metal door, and the rain immediately swept inside, cold and sharp against his face. The exterior floodlights blazed to life, illuminating the station's front parking area in harsh white light. And there, swaying on legs that could barely support its weight, stood a horse. For 3 full seconds, Ethan's brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. A horse. At their fire station. In the middle of a thunderstorm, at 5 o'clock in the morning, the animal was skeletal, ribs protruding sharply beneath hide that was matted with mud and rain, coat dulled to a sickly brownish grey that might once have been chestnut. Its head hung low, ears flat against its skull, and its eyes, those eyes were what made Ethan's stomach turn. They were glassy, unfocused, the eyes of something that had walked beyond exhaustion into a realm where only survival instinct remained. "Jesus Christ," Blake breathed, appearing at Ethan's shoulder. "Is that a horse?" Carter finished, his voice tight. "Ethan, don't approach yet. Could be injured, could be dangerous." But Ethan was already moving forward, his training kicking in despite the surreal nature of the situation. He'd grown up around horses. His grandmother had owned a small ranch outside Charlotte, and he recognized the posture of an animal at the absolute end of its rope. This wasn't aggression. This was desperation. The horse lifted its head slightly as Ethan approached, and that's when he saw it, a piece of paper wrapped carefully in what looked like a sandwich bag, tied to the leather reins that hung loose around the animal's neck. The improvised waterproofing had kept the note dry despite the downpour. "There's something tied to it," Ethan called back, reaching slowly for the reins. The horse didn't pull away. It actually took a trembling step forward, as if recognizing help when it saw it. "It's got a note." The moment Ethan's fingers touched the plastic-wrapped paper, the horse pushed forward, actually stepping across the threshold into the station's covered entrance area. Its hooves clicked weakly against the concrete, and it swayed, nearly collapsing before catching itself. "Blake, get some blankets from the ambulance," Carter ordered, already on his radio. "Dispatch, this is Station 47. We need animal control and a vet emergency response to our location. We've got a severely malnourished horse that just showed up at our door." There was a pause on the other end. Say again. 47. You heard me right. A horse. Looks like it's been starved and walked hard. No owner in sight. Ethan carefully untied the plastic bag from the reins, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The note inside was written on a torn piece of notebook paper, the handwriting shaky but legible, formed in harsh pencil strokes. Please help him. Can't take care anymore. Don't tell anyone where he came from. If you try to bring him back, they'll kill him. And maybe you too. Midnight knows the way, but can't go back. Please, no police. The words were simple, desperate, and absolutely terrifying in their implications. Carter, Ethan said quietly, holding up the note. You need to see this. Blake returned with an armful of emergency blankets just as Carter read the message, his weathered face going still and hard. They draped the blankets over the horse's shaking body, and the animal, Midnight apparently, lowered its head with something that looked like relief. They'll kill him, Carter read aloud, and maybe you too. He looked up at Ethan, then at the horse standing in their station entrance, rain pouring down just beyond the overhang. What the hell did this animal walk away from? Ethan ran his hand gently along Midnight's neck, feeling the prominent bones beneath the matted coat, and that's when his fingers found something that made his blood truly run cold. Beneath the mud and rain, partially hidden by the grime, were fresh marks, deep grooves in the skin that could only have been made by rope. Tight rope. Rope that had been pulled and secured with enough force to cut through hair and into flesh. Carter, look at this. Ethan carefully brushed away some of the caked dirt, revealing more of the damage. These rope burns. They're recent, within the last few days. Blake knelt down, examining the horse's legs with the methodical attention he'd learned in his EMT training. Got what looks like barbed wire cuts here on the front legs, partially healed but still fresh. And he paused, leaning closer. Is that a brand? Ethan moved to where Blake was pointing, on Midnight's left shoulder. Beneath the layers of dirt and dried sweat, there was indeed a mark, but it wasn't a traditional ranch brand. It was crude, irregular, like someone had used a piece of heated metal without care or skill. The shape was hard to make out under the filth, but it looked almost like a symbol rather than letters. We need to clean this animal up before the vet gets here, Carter said, making a decision. Get some warm water, gentle soap if we have any, and somebody call Autumn. Autumn Wells was Station 47's primary paramedic, but she was also the only member of their crew who'd worked with large animals before joining the fire department. She'd grown up on a working farm in Virginia and knew horses better than most veterinarians Ethan had met. 20 minutes later, as they carefully sponged away layers of mud and sweat, Midnight stood with unnatural stillness, as if understanding that these humans were trying to help. The horse drank eagerly from the bucket of water Blake provided, but refused the hay they'd scrounged from a member of the crew who kept chickens. Too scared to eat, Autumn said, arriving in her personal truck with her long auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd thrown a raincoat over her pajamas and driven the 15 minutes from her farmhouse without question. Or his stomach's too shrunken. We'll need to go slow. She approached Midnight with the calm confidence of someone who'd handled frightened animals all her life, speaking in low, soothing tones. The horse's ears pricked forward slightly, the first sign of real awareness they'd seen. As Autumn examined the animal, her expression grew progressively darker. These injuries, Ethan, this isn't neglect. This is abuse, systematic abuse. She traced the rope burns with gentle fingers. He's been tied up tight, probably for days at a time. The barbed wire cuts suggest he tried to escape through a fence, and this brand. She carefully cleaned the area, revealing the full symbol, a crude circle with what looked like 3 slash marks through it. This isn't a ranch mark. I've never seen anything like it. The note said not to tell anyone where he came from, Blake said, looking uncomfortable. Said they'd kill him if we tried to bring him back. Autumn's blue eyes snapped up. Note? What note? Carter handed her the plastic-wrapped message. As she read it, her jaw tightened. This horse didn't just wander here. Someone sent him. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. How do you figure? Ethan asked. Because Millbrook County Fire Station 47 is exactly 12 miles from the nearest residential area down Route 15, Autumn said, her voice tight. In the dark, in the rain, a starving, injured horse making it here on his own. That's not accident. That's navigation. Someone who knew this horse well enough to trust he'd make it here sent him for help. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Midnight suddenly tensed, ears swiveling toward the sound of a vehicle passing on the main road. His entire body went rigid, muscles trembling not from exhaustion now, but from pure fear. Easy, boy, Autumn murmured, but the horse was beyond comforting. He pulled against the loose hold Ethan had on his reins, actually trying to drag him toward the apparatus bay doors, toward the direction of Route 15, toward the darkness beyond their station lights. He's trying to take us somewhere, Blake said, stating the obvious. Carter pulled out his phone, opening the Maps application. Autumn, you said 12 miles down Route 15. What's out that way? Old farmland mostly. Some abandoned properties from when tobacco crashed in the 90s. There's the Morrison Ranch, but they're legitimate. Show horses, breeding stock, and then... She paused, her expression shifting. There's the Pritchard property. Pritchard? Ethan repeated. Something about the name rang a distant bell. Warren Pritchard owned about 200 acres out past Miller's Creek, died maybe 3 years ago. Property went to his nephew, some guy from out of state. Haven't heard much about it since, but... Autumn's voice trailed off. But what? Carter pressed. There were rumors before Pritchard died. Nothing concrete, just talk about strange comings and goings, vehicles at odd hours. Some of the county deputies were supposedly looking into it, but then Pritchard had his heart attack and everything just sort of stopped. Midnight whinnied, a thin, desperate sound that barely qualified as a horse's call. He pulled again toward the bay doors, toward Route 15, toward whatever he'd fled from. Ethan looked down at the note in his hand, at the desperate scrawl. If you try to bring him back, they'll kill him, and maybe you too. We can't just ignore this, he said quietly. We also can't go charging into a potentially dangerous situation without backup, Carter countered. The note specifically says no police. Because whoever wrote it is scared, Autumn said. Scared enough to send away what might be their only companion, their only hope of getting a message out. She met Ethan's eyes. We have to do something. The veterinary emergency unit arrived then, a mobile clinic driven by Dr. Haley Chen, a compact woman in her mid-30s who took one look at Midnight and immediately started barking orders about fluids, blood work, and careful refeeding protocols. As she worked, cataloging every injury and deprivation, her face grew increasingly grim. This animal should be dead, she said flatly, checking Midnight's gums. The level of starvation, the dehydration, the injuries. He should have collapsed miles ago, whatever kept him going. She looked at the firefighters. It wasn't physical strength, it was determination, like he knew he had to get somewhere specific. Can you trace where he came from? Blake asked. Check for a microchip or something. Dr. Chen ran the scanner. No chip, and even if there was, that doesn't tell us about current ownership, just original registration. She paused. But I can tell you this horse is a purebred quarter horse, probably 8 or 9 years old, and at one point was very well cared for. The conformation, the hoof care, someone invested serious money in this animal before. She gestured at his emaciated frame. Before this happened. Ethan made a decision. How long before he's stable enough to move? Move where? Dr. Chen asked sharply. Somewhere safe. Somewhere off the radar. Autumn nodded slowly. I've got space at my farm. Secure barn, good fencing. I can keep him out of sight while we figure this out. Carter ran a hand through his greying hair, the gesture of a man caught between duty and conscience. If we do this, if we investigate this without going through proper channels, we could be putting ourselves in serious jeopardy, legal jeopardy. And if we don't, Ethan said, looking at Midnight's hollow eyes, someone out there who was brave enough to send this horse for help stays trapped in whatever hell this animal escaped from. The station fell silent, except for the rain and the soft sound of Midnight's labored breathing. Somewhere out on Route 15, beyond the reach of their floodlights, the darkness waited, and within that darkness, a secret worth killing for. Midnight took one trembling step toward Ethan, then another, until his muzzle rested against the firefighter's chest. The horse's breath was warm despite everything, and in his eyes, those exhausted, traumatized eyes, Ethan saw something he recognized from his years of emergency response. Hope. "We investigate," Carter said finally, his voice carrying the weight of command. Quietly, carefully. "And if we find what I think we're going to find..." He looked at each member of his crew. "We call in everyone, sheriff, state police, whoever we need. Agreed?" They all nodded. Outside, lightning split the sky, and in that brief flash of illumination, Ethan could have sworn he saw a vehicle parked on the road beyond their property line, just sitting there, headlights off, watching. But when he blinked, there was only darkness and rain, and the growing certainty that whoever had sent Midnight hadn't just been asking for help. They'd been sending a warning. The rain had finally stopped by the time they got Midnight loaded into Autumn's livestock trailer at 7:15 a.m. The horse had resisted at first, that deep-seated fear making him pull back from the confined space, but Autumn's gentle persistence and a handful of grain had eventually coaxed him inside. As they secured the trailer gate, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, turning from black to deep purple. "I'll get him settled and start a proper refeeding schedule," Autumn said, climbing into her truck's cab. "Dr. Chen left me detailed instructions, but Ethan..." She leaned out the window, her voice dropping. "Be careful. Whatever this is, it's bigger than a neglected horse." Ethan nodded, watching as she pulled out of the station lot, the trailer's taillights disappearing down the road. Carter had already left to file the necessary paperwork, carefully worded to avoid raising red flags, and Blake was inside, researching property records for anything related to the Pritchard land. By 10 a.m., Ethan was supposed to be home, crashed in bed after his 24-hour shift. Instead, he found himself sitting at the station's computer, staring at satellite images of rural Millbrook County, zooming in on the area around Miller's Creek. The Pritchard property was easy to spot, a large parcel of land carved out of the pine forests, with a main house, several outbuildings, and what looked like paddocks or corrals. The imagery was from 2 years ago, dated in the corner of the screen, showing neat fencing and maintained structures. "Found something," Blake said, appearing with a printed stack of county records. "Warren Pritchard died of a heart attack in October 2022. Property transferred to his nephew, Marcus Vance. From Tennessee, here's where it gets interesting. Vance has zero background in agriculture or ranching. He's a former military contractor, security consulting, that type of thing." Security consulting. Ethan scrolled through the satellite view, noting the property's isolation. The nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away. Perfect cover for whatever you don't want people seeing. "Gets better," Blake continued, sitting down with his laptop. "I checked local news archives. About 6 months before Pritchard died, there was a tiny article, barely 3 paragraphs, about county deputies responding to a noise complaint at his property. Nothing came of it, investigation closed, no charges. But the complaint came from a delivery driver who said he heard what sounded like shouting and possibly gunshots. Ethan felt ice forming in his stomach. And nobody followed up? Pritchard was well connected. Old family, donated to local politicians, sat on the county agricultural board for years. By the time anyone might have pushed harder, he was dead. Blake's young face was troubled. Ethan, what if whatever was happening there didn't stop when Pritchard died? What if his nephew continued it? Before Ethan could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Autumn. "You need to see this. Come to the farm, now." 25 minutes later, Ethan pulled his pickup truck into Autumn's gravel driveway. Her property was modest, but well-maintained. A white farmhouse built in the 1940s, a red barn with fresh paint, and 30 acres of pasture, currently home to her 2 personal horses and a handful of rescue goats. He found her in the barn, standing outside Midnight's stall with Dr. Chen. The veterinarian had apparently returned with more supplies, and both women's faces were grim. "Look at this," Autumn said without preamble, leading him into the stall. Midnight stood in the fresh bedding, already looking marginally better, with the dirt washed away and proper lighting revealing his true condition. But what Autumn was pointing to made Ethan's breath catch. She'd fully cleaned the branded symbol on Midnight's shoulder, and now, in daylight, it was clearly visible. A circle with 3 slash marks, but beneath the surface brand was something else. Scar tissue. Old scar tissue forming letters that had been deliberately obscured by the newer, cruder brand. "I took the liberty of photographing it under different lighting," Dr. Chen said, pulling up images on her tablet. "Look at this UV shot." Under ultraviolet light, the old brand showed up clearly beneath the newer one. RBF. RBF, Ethan repeated. "Means what?" "Riverside Breeding Farms," Autumn said quietly. "It was a high-end quarter-horse breeding operation in Virginia. Closed down about 5 years ago after the owner, Richard Brennan, was arrested." "Arrested for what?" Autumn and Dr. Chen exchanged glances. "Illegal animal fighting," Dr. Chen said. "But not dog fighting, something worse. He was running an underground operation where wealthy clients paid enormous sums to watch animals fight, horses against each other, horses against other large animals. The case made national news for about a week, then disappeared when Brennan took a plea deal." Ethan felt sick. And Midnight was part of that? Maybe. Or maybe he was one of the horses they seized when they shut the operation down. The state auction dispersed over 40 horses. Autumn's voice was tight. "Someone bought this horse, rebranded him to hide his origin, and then," she gestured at the animal's scarred body, "then brought him here, to Millbrook County, to the Pritchard property." Ethan's mind was racing. What if the operation didn't actually shut down? What if it just relocated? That would explain why someone with Vance's background, security, discretion, would take over a remote property, Dr. Chen said. It would explain the secrecy, the isolation. "And the note," Autumn added. "Someone inside who couldn't get out, someone who cared enough about this horse to risk everything by sending him away." Ethan's phone buzzed again. This time it was Carter. "Blake found something else. Get back to the station." Back at Station 47, Blake had transformed the common room into a makeshift investigation headquarters. His laptop was connected to the large TV screen, displaying what looked like security camera footage. "Where did you get this?" Ethan asked. "County traffic cameras," Blake said. "Technically public access for emergency services. I pulled footage from the camera at the intersection of Route 15 and Miller Road. That's about a mile from the Pritchard property." He clicked play. "This is from 3 nights ago, 2:47 a.m. The grainy footage showed the dark intersection, sodium lights creating pools of orange illumination. Then, barely visible in the frame, a horse and rider appeared, moving fast, the horse's gait uneven, the rider hunched low. They crossed through the intersection, heading north toward the town center. "That's Midnight," Autumn breathed. She'd followed Ethan back to the station. But who's riding him? Blake zoomed in, enhancing the image as much as the software allowed. The rider was small, slender, wearing what looked like dark clothing and a hood. Can't make out features, but based on size and body language, I'd guess female, maybe late teens or early 20s. She was running, Carter said, appearing from his office, running from something bad enough to risk riding an already exhausted horse through the night. But she didn't make it here, Ethan said, the realization hitting hard. Midnight showed up alone. Blake clicked to another clip, this one time-stamped 3:12 a.m., just 25 minutes later. Same intersection, but now a dark pickup truck appeared, moving slowly, searchlights sweeping the roadside. It paused at the intersection, the light playing across the trees and ditches, then continued north. They were hunting her, Autumn whispered. And she probably hid, Carter said. Sent the horse on alone because she knew it would draw attention if caught, but might make it through if they were focused on finding her. Jesus! Ethan ran his hands through his hair. We're not talking about animal abuse anymore. We're talking about someone being held against their will. Which means we call the sheriff, Carter said firmly. Right now. This is beyond... No. The voice came from the doorway. They all turned to see Brooke Templeton standing there, rain-soaked and trembling. At 23, Brooke worked as a part-time dispatcher and volunteer firefighter, but right now she looked terrified. You can't call the sheriff. Deputy Morrison. He's one of them. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brooke, what are you talking about? Carter asked carefully. She stepped inside, wrapping her arms around herself. My cousin works at Morrison Ranch, helping with their horses. Last month, she mentioned that Deputy Morrison had been out to the Pritchard property multiple times, said he was consulting on rural security. But she thought it was weird because Morrison isn't on rural patrol. He works criminal investigations. Her voice shook. When I heard about the horse showing up here, I remembered something else she said, that she'd seen Morrison loading equipment into a truck with Marcus Vance. Equipment that looked like cages, transport cages. Silence filled the station. How certain are you about this? Ethan asked gently. Certain enough that I haven't slept in 3 days worrying about whether to say something. Brooke's eyes were red-rimmed. If there's corruption, if this goes higher than we think, then we document everything, Carter said, his voice taking on the command tone that had led crews through countless emergencies. We gather evidence, we build a case airtight enough that it doesn't matter who's dirty, and we find that girl before whoever's looking for her does. How? Blake asked. We don't even know who she is. Autumn was staring at the frozen image of the horse and rider on the screen. Midnight knows who she is, and I'd bet everything I own that he knows where she is too. They all looked at the screen, at the grainy image of a terrified rider on an exhausted horse, fleeing into the darkness. She sent him to us, Ethan said slowly, because she trusted that whoever found him would help. That means we're her only chance. Outside, the morning had turned grey and cold, storm clouds gathering for another round of rain. Somewhere in Millbrook County, a young woman was hiding, desperate and alone, and somewhere else, people willing to kill to keep their secrets were hunting her. Ethan thought of the note tied to Midnight's reins, the desperate scrawl, the plea for help. We start tonight, he said. Careful reconnaissance of the Pritchard property, document what we can see from public roads, look for any sign of activity. No direct approach, nothing that tips them off. I'm coming, Autumn said immediately. Me too, Blake added. Carter was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the decision. Then he nodded. We go in my personal vehicle. We stay in constant communication. And the very second, this looks like it's going to turn violent, we retreat and call in the state police. Local corruption be damned. Agreed. They all agreed, though Ethan suspected they were all thinking the same thing. If the situation was already violent enough to send a starving horse through the night carrying a message, they were already far past the point of simple observation. but none of them could turn away now. Not when someone out there had gambled everything on the hope that good people would answer a desperate call for help. The clock on the wall read 11:47 a.m. They had 8 hours until sunset. 8 hours to prepare for whatever they were about to walk into. The sun set at 6:43 p.m., and by 8, full darkness had settled over Millbrook County like a suffocating blanket. Carter's silver Ford F-250, chosen because it was generic enough to blend in with the dozens of similar trucks in rural North Carolina, sat parked on a muddy turnoff half a mile from the Pritchard property boundary. Inside the cab, Ethan, Carter, Autumn, and Blake sat in tense silence, dressed in dark clothing and equipped with flashlights, binoculars, and their phones set to silent. Blake had brought a camera with a telephoto lens borrowed from his photographer girlfriend. Autumn had a backpack with first aid supplies, rope, and animal sedatives. "Just in case," she'd said grimly. "Last chance to back out," Carter said quietly. "Nobody would blame you." Nobody moved. "All right, then." Carter pulled out a hand-drawn map that Blake had created using satellite imagery and county property records. "The main house is here, about a quarter-mile in from the road. 3 outbuildings, 2 barns, and what looks like a workshop or storage facility. The larger barn has what appears to be exercise paddocks attached, which suggests that's where they'd keep horses or other large animals." "Camera coverage?" Ethan asked. "Unknown. We have to assume they've got security, especially if they're running an illegal operation. So we stay in the tree line, use night vision if we have it." "I've got a monocular," Blake said, pulling out a compact night vision device. "Military surplus. My brother used it for hunting." "Good. We observe from a distance. We photograph anything suspicious, and we absolutely do not engage. This is reconnaissance only." Carter's stern gaze swept across each of them. "Everyone clear?" They were clear, though the knot in Ethan's stomach suggested his body didn't agree with the cautious approach. Every instinct honed by years of emergency response screamed at him that someone out there needed help now, not after they'd built a perfect legal case. They moved through the woods in single file, Carter in the lead, using hand signals he'd learned during his own time in the Marines decades ago. The pine forest was dense, the ground soft with fallen needles that muffled their footsteps. A quarter moon provided minimal light, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s, their breath misting in the cold air. After 15 minutes of careful movement, Carter held up a fist. Stop. Ahead, through the trees, lights were visible. They crept forward until they had a clear view of the Pritchard property, taking positions behind a fallen log that provided both cover and concealment. Blake immediately raised the camera, the telephoto lens extending like a telescope. The main house was a sprawling ranch-style building, well lit, with several vehicles parked in front, 2 pickup trucks, an SUV, and a commercial van with no markings. The larger barn was about 50 yards behind the house, a modern pole barn structure with metal siding and a wide central door that currently stood partially open. "Count 6 people outside," Blake whispered, snapping photos. "All male, all armed." "Armed?" Autumn's voice was tight. Handguns visible on at least 3 of them. The others could be carrying concealed. Through his binoculars, Ethan watched the men moving between the house and the barn with the casual confidence of people on their own territory. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe late 40s, seemed to be giving orders. The others deferred to him, nodding, moving when he gestured. "That's Vance," Carter said quietly. "Has to be." As they watched, one of the barn's side doors opened, and 2 more men emerged, dragging something between them. Not something, someone. A figure in dark clothing, struggling weakly, hands bound. "Oh God," Autumn breathed. Blake's camera shutter clicked rapidly. Even from this distance, even in the poor light, it was clear the prisoner was in bad shape, barely able to stand, head hanging low. They dragged the person toward the house, and as they passed under an exterior light, Ethan caught a glimpse of long dark hair, a slight frame. Female, young, exactly matching the description of the rider on Midnight. We have to. Autumn started, but Carter's hand on her arm stopped her. We document, he said firmly, though his voice was strained. We document, we retreat, we call in the cavalry. Going in there now gets all of us killed and doesn't help her. Ethan knew Carter was right, but watching that girl being dragged into the house, knowing what she might be facing, it took every ounce of discipline not to charge down there. Blake kept shooting, the camera capturing everything, the armed men, the prisoner, the vehicles with visible license plates. Evidence. But evidence wouldn't help if they didn't get it to the right people. Look at the barn, Ethan whispered, pointing. Through the partially open door, movement was visible, large shapes moving in the shadows, and sounds, low, distressed animal sounds that carried even at this distance. Horses, Autumn said, her voice breaking. Multiple horses, and I hear... Is that a dog? No, dogs, plural. The sound was unmistakable once she mentioned it, deep, aggressive barking, punctuated by whining and snarling. Fighting dogs, Ethan realized with cold certainty. They were raising fighting dogs alongside whatever else they were doing with the horses. One of the armed men walked to the barn door and shouted something inside. The animal sounds intensified briefly, then quieted, the silence of fear, not calm. I've seen enough, Carter said. We move back to the truck. We drive straight to the state police barracks in Ashton. That's 40 miles away, outside local jurisdiction. We turn over everything we have and let them handle it. What about the girl? Blake asked. How long before they move her? Or worse? It was the question they were all thinking, but nobody wanted to voice. If this was an illegal fighting operation, if they were trafficking animals and possibly people, if they had already killed to keep their secrets, what were the odds that girl would still be alive in the 2 or 3 hours it would take to mobilize a proper law enforcement response? Ethan was about to agree with Carter's plan when Autumn suddenly grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in painfully. Ethan, look at the tree line, east side of the property. He swung his binoculars to where she was pointing, and his blood turned to ice. 3 men were moving through the woods, flashlights sweeping methodically, walking in a pattern that suggested they were searching, and they were heading directly toward the area where Carter's truck was parked. They know we're here, Blake whispered. How do they know? Doesn't matter, Carter hissed. We move. Now. Back the way we came, but quiet. If they find the truck. They didn't need him to finish the sentence. If the men found Carter's truck, they'd know someone was watching. They'd know their operation was compromised, and that girl inside the house would pay the price. They moved as quickly as they dared through the dark woods, trying to balance speed with silence. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the trees, growing brighter. They're gaining, Autumn panted. Ethan's mind raced. They were still 10 minutes from the truck at their current pace. The searchers behind them would reach the road in maybe 5, would find the truck in 6. Unless someone slowed them down. Carter, Ethan said quietly, give me your keys, take the others and keep moving. I'll draw them off, circle around, get to the truck. Absolutely not, Carter said immediately. It's the only play. You know it is. Ethan held out his hand. I'm faster than you, no offense. I can move quieter, and I grew up in woods like these. For a long moment, Carter just stared at him. Then, jaw tight, he pressed the keys into Ethan's palm. You get to that truck, you drive straight to the state police. You don't wait for us. Like hell I don't. That's an order, Rodriguez. Ethan nodded, knowing he had no intention of following it. See you at the rendezvous. Before anyone could argue further, he veered left, deliberately snapping a branch loudly enough to carry. Behind them, One of the flashlight beams immediately swung in his direction. "Over there!" The voices were close, too close, but Ethan was already running, making just enough noise to keep them following while staying invisible in the darkness. He counted on their flashlights ruining their night vision, on his knowledge of how to move through a forest without being a clear target. A gunshot cracked through the night. The bullet hit a tree 3 feet to his left, bark exploding. They weren't warning shots. Ethan dropped low and changed direction, heart hammering. Another shot, wider this time. They were shooting at sound, not sight, which meant they didn't have a clear target. He kept moving, leading them away from where Carter, Autumn, and Blake were retreating. The truck was still half a mile away, and now he had armed men actively hunting him through the dark. This, he thought grimly, is what we firefighters call a rapidly evolving situation. Another shot. Closer. Ethan dove behind a massive oak tree, breathing hard, trying to remember exactly where the turnoff was. The men were spreading out now. He could hear them coordinating, trying to flank him. His phone buzzed silently in his pocket. A text from Blake. "We're clear. Don't be a hero." Too late for that, Ethan thought. He waited until the flashlight beams were oriented away from his position, then broke cover and ran. Full sprint now, not caring about noise, just distance. The truck was close. He could feel it. Gunfire erupted behind him. Multiple shooters now, bullets cracking through the branches overhead. And then he burst out of the tree line onto the muddy turnoff, and there was Carter's truck, exactly where they'd left it. Ethan's hands shook as he jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and he threw the transmission into drive just as flashlight beams emerged from the woods behind him. More gunshots, one punching through the truck's rear window in a spray of glass. Ethan floored the accelerator, the truck fishtailing in the mud before the tires caught, and launched them forward onto the paved road. In his rearview mirror, he saw the men running toward their own vehicles. They weren't going to let him go. His phone rang. Carter. "I'm clear," Ethan said before Carter could speak, "but they're following. Where are you?" "Half-mile up Route 15, hidden in the tree line." "Ethan, you need to lead them away from us. Head toward town. We'll find another way out and meet you at—" "No time for that. They're right behind me." Ethan checked his mirror. Headlights. 2 vehicles closing fast. "I'm going to lead them north, then loop back. You 3 get to state police. Tell them everything." "Ethan!" "Tell them there's a girl in that house who doesn't have time for us to debate. Tell them armed suspects fired on a firefighter. Tell them whatever it takes to get them moving now." He paused. "And Carter, get Autumn to check on Midnight. If they figure out where that horse went, she's next on their list." He ended the call before Carter could argue, focusing all his attention on the dark road ahead. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80. The truck wasn't built for high-speed chases, but neither were the vehicles behind him, and he knew these roads. The question was, could he stay ahead long enough to matter? Behind him, one of the pursuing vehicles pulled alongside in the opposite lane. In the brief moment they were parallel, Ethan saw the passenger window rolling down, saw the gun. He jerked the wheel right, taking a side road without braking, the truck's tires screaming in protest. The pursuing vehicle overshot, brake lights flaring as it tried to slow. But the second vehicle made the turn. Ethan's headlights illuminated the narrow country road ahead, all curves and hills, trees pressing in from both sides. His phone was ringing again. Carter or Blake or Autumn, but he couldn't answer, couldn't do anything but drive. The GPS showed he was 8 miles from the town limits, 8 miles to civilization, to witnesses, to safety. The pursuing vehicle's headlights filled his mirrors, growing larger. 7 miles. They rammed his bumper, and the truck shuddered, but held steady. 6 miles. Another ram, harder this time. Ethan's head snapped back against the headrest. 5 miles. They pulled alongside again, and this time Ethan saw the gun clearly in the passenger's hand, saw it aiming. 4 miles. He slammed on the brakes. The pursuing vehicle shot past him, brake lights flaring too late. Ethan watched as they skidded, trying to slow, trying to turn around. He executed a sharp three-point turn and floored the accelerator back the way he'd come, back toward Route 15, back toward where this had all started. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 3 miles back to the main road. If he could make it that far, if he could reach the highway, he could disappear into traffic, make it to the state police. The pursuing vehicle had turned around and was coming after him again, but he had a lead now, maybe 30 seconds. It would have to be enough. The turnoff to Route 15 appeared in his headlights. Ethan took it at 60, the truck nearly rolling before stabilizing. Behind him, the pursuit vehicle tried to match the turn and couldn't. He heard the screech of metal, saw in his mirror as they went off the road into the ditch. One down. But where was the other vehicle? He got his answer a minute later when he rounded a curve and found it sitting sideways across the road, blocking both lanes. Ethan's foot slammed on the brake, but it was too late. He was going too fast. The impact threw him forward against the seatbelt with bruising force. The airbag deployed, slamming into his face. The world became noise and pain, and the smell of deployed explosive charges. When the chaos settled, Ethan found himself in the crushed remains of Carter's truck, ears ringing, face bleeding from where the airbag had hit. Through the cracked windshield, he saw men approaching, flashlights and guns. This was it. This was how it ended. But then, cutting through the ringing in his ears, he heard a sound that seemed impossible. Sirens. Multiple sirens approaching fast from the direction of town. The men heard them too. One of them cursed viciously and gestured to the others. They ran back to their vehicle, executed a rapid three-point turn, and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ethan sitting in the wreckage as red and blue lights filled the night. The first officer who reached his window was young, maybe 25, with wide eyes and a hand on his holstered weapon. "Sir, are you all right? We got a call about shots fired and a high-speed chase." "State police," Ethan managed through bloody lips. "I need to talk to state police right now." "Sir, you're injured. We need to get you medical." "There's a girl being held at the Pritchard property on Miller Road. Armed men. Illegal animal fighting. They just tried to kill me." Ethan grabbed the officer's arm. "You call state police. You call them now, because if you don't, that girl dies tonight." The young officer stared at him for a long moment, then reached for his radio. And as Ethan sat there, bleeding and battered in the wreckage of his friend's truck, listening to the dispatcher's voice, coordinating a multi-agency response, he thought of midnight, of a starving horse walking through the night, carrying a desperate plea for help. They'd heard that plea, and now, finally, they were answering it. The state police command post had been set up in the parking lot of a closed gas station 3 miles from the Pritchard property. It was 11:47 p.m., and the lot was a chaos of emergency vehicles, state police cruisers, county sheriff units, an ambulance, and 2 tactical response trucks. Portable lights turned the night into harsh artificial day. Ethan sat in the back of the ambulance, getting his face stitched up by a paramedic, while simultaneously giving his 4th statement to a grim-faced state police detective named Sarah Castellanos. "So you're telling me," Castellanos said, flipping through her notes, "that a starving horse showed up at your fire station with a note tied to its reins. You tracked its origin to this property, conducted unauthorized surveillance, and then engaged in a high-speed chase with armed suspects who fired on you multiple times." "That about covers it," Ethan said, wincing as the paramedic pulled another stitch tight. "You understand that what you did, the surveillance, the trespassing, could compromise any case we build. I understand that a young woman is being held against her will by armed men running an illegal fighting operation, and every minute we spend talking about proper procedure is another minute she's in danger." Castellanos' expression softened slightly. "We've got a tactical team suiting up right now. We'll have eyes on the property in 20 minutes, entry in 40 if the situation warrants. It warrants, Ethan said flatly. Trust me. Hold still, the paramedic muttered, finishing the last stitch on the cut above Ethan's eyebrow. You're lucky. Could have been a lot worse. Ethan thought of the bullets punching through Carter's truck and didn't feel particularly lucky. Carter, Autumn and Blake were giving their own statements to other officers, having made it safely back to town and immediately contacted state police. Blake's photographs, the armed men, the prisoner being dragged, the vehicles with license plates, had provided the evidence needed for the emergency warrant that was being executed. "Detective!" A uniformed trooper jogged over, holding a tablet. "We've got preliminary on those license plates. 2 of the vehicles are registered to Marcus Vance. The van comes back to a shell company in Tennessee, but we're finding connections to Richard Brennan." Castellanos' eyebrows rose. "The animal fighting case from Virginia? The one that went away?" "Didn't go away so much as relocate," the trooper said. "We're getting hits on financial connections between the shell company Vance and at least 3 other properties in the region. Detective, I think this is bigger than one illegal operation." "How much bigger?" "Multi-state bigger. Underground network bigger. We've already notified FBI." Castellanos turned to Ethan. "If what you're telling me is true, you and your crew just stumbled into the middle of a major criminal enterprise." "I don't care what we stumbled into," Ethan said, standing despite the paramedics' protests. "I care about getting that girl out of there alive." As if on cue, a sharp voice cut across the parking lot. "Somebody better tell me why my deputy is being detained." Sheriff Tom Wardle was a large man in his mid-50s, with a red face that suggested either high blood pressure or high temper. He stormed toward the command post with the confidence of someone used to being the biggest authority in the county. "Sheriff Wardell," Castellanos said calmly, "Deputy Morrison is being detained for questioning regarding his relationship with suspects involved in an ongoing investigation." "That's bullshit and you know it. Morrison is one of my best officers. Whatever these—" He gestured dismissively at Ethan and the others. "Civilian vigilantes told you is clearly." Deputy Morrison was photographed at the suspect property in the company of known criminals. Castellanos interrupted, her voice hardening. "He was photographed handling what appears to be illegal fighting equipment, and his phone records show multiple calls to Marcus Vance over the past 6 months. So unless you'd like to join him in questioning, Sheriff, I suggest you step back and let us do our jobs." Wardle's face went from red to purple, but he stepped back, shooting Ethan a look of pure venom as he did so. "Make friends everywhere you go," Blake muttered, appearing at Ethan's side. His young face was pale but determined. "Tactical team is about to roll out. They're letting us observe from the mobile command center." The mobile command center was a modified RV packed with communications equipment and monitors showing various camera feeds. The tactical team leader, a compact man named Lieutenant Reins, was briefing his squad with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times. "We've got aerial thermal imaging showing approximately 15 heat signatures on the property, 12 in the main house, 3 in the barn. No indication of hostages in immediate distress, but we're going in under the assumption that time is critical." He pointed to a digital map. "Team 1 takes the house, Team 2 secures the barn and any suspects there. Team 3 is mobile reserve. Questions?" There were none. These were professionals who knew their jobs. At 12:33 a.m., the tactical teams moved out in a convoy of unmarked vehicles, lights off, moving fast and silent through the darkness. In the command center, Ethan, Carter, Autumn and Blake watched the feeds from helmet cameras as the teams approached the property. "Approaching primary objective," Reeves's voice came through the speakers, calm and measured. "Thermal shows multiple heat signatures, first floor, no movement in upper levels." The helmet camera view showed the team stacking up outside the main house's front door, weapons ready, moving with practiced precision. Breach in 3, 2, 1. The door exploded inward, and suddenly everything was noise and motion, shouted commands of state police, figures moving fast through the interior, suspects being forced to the ground, weapons secured. "House secure," came the call. "We've got 12 in custody, no shots fired, but—" A pause, and Reeves's voice took on a harder edge. "We need medics. We've got an injured female, late teens or early 20s. She's alive, but in bad shape." Ethan felt Autumn's hand grip his arm tightly. On the monitors, Team 2 was breaching the barn. The helmet camera showed interior chaos, pens containing multiple horses in various states of malnutrition, kennels full of dogs bred and trained for fighting, equipment designed to force animals into combat. "Jesus Christ," one of the tactical officers breathed, his voice picked up by the microphone. "How many animals are we looking at?" "At least 20 horses, maybe 30 dogs," came the response. "We need animal control. We need veterinary emergency response. We need to focus on the human victim first," Reeves interrupted. "Team 1, what's her status?" Through the camera feeds, they watched as paramedics rushed into the house. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness, then finally movement, a stretcher being carried out, a small figure strapped to it, IV lines already running. "She's conscious," the paramedic reported. "Dehydrated, malnourished, signs of physical abuse. But she's talking. She's asking about a horse named Midnight." In the command center, Autumn let out a choked sob of relief. "Tell her Midnight is safe," Castellanos said into her radio. "Tell her he made it to help. Tell her she's safe now." The helicopter transporting the victim, her name was Haley Carson, they learned, 19 years old, reported missing from a group home in Tennessee 8 months ago, lifted off at 1:15 a.m., heading for the trauma center in Ashton. By 2:00 a.m., all 12 suspects were in custody, including Marcus Vance and Deputy Morrison. By 3:00 a.m., veterinary teams were working to stabilize and document the rescued animals, each one representing evidence in what was rapidly becoming one of the largest illegal animal fighting busts in the southeastern United States. And by 4 a.m., as the first light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, Ethan found himself standing outside the barn with Autumn, watching as horses were carefully loaded into trailers for transport to emergency facilities. "She saved them all," Autumn said quietly. "Haley. She could have sent Midnight away and tried to escape on her own, but she knew that if she just ran, these animals would still be here suffering. She knew that sending Midnight to us, with that note, she was gambling that we'd care enough to investigate, to find all of them." Ethan thought of that desperate note. Please, help him. Not help me. Help him. Even in her darkest moment, Haley Carson had been thinking about the voiceless creatures who couldn't save themselves. "She's braver than anyone I've ever met," he said. A state police officer approached them, tablet in hand. "You're the firefighters from Station 47. They nodded. "You should know. We've made connections between this operation and at least 6 other properties across 3 states. Because of what you found here tonight, we're executing warrants on all of them as we speak. Current estimate is we'll be rescuing over 200 animals and potentially a dozen human trafficking victims." He paused. "What you people did, unauthorized and dangerous as it was, you may have just broken up one of the largest illegal fighting networks in the country." After he left, Carter joined them, his weathered face showing the exhaustion of the long night. "State police want us to come in tomorrow for more formal statements, and there's going to be an inquiry into our actions, unauthorized surveillance, all that." "Worth it," Blake said, appearing with steaming cups of coffee from one of the emergency vehicles. Whatever the consequences, it was worth it. They stood together in the growing light, watching as trailer after trailer left the property carrying rescued animals towards safety and treatment. The operation would continue for hours yet, documenting evidence, securing the scene, unraveling the full extent of the criminal network. But the immediate crisis was over. The girl was safe. The animals were safe. And a horse named Midnight, a starving, desperate horse who'd walked through the night carrying a plea for help, had done what seemed impossible. He'd saved them all. 3 weeks later, on a mild November afternoon, Ethan pulled his truck into the gravel driveway of Autumn's farm. The administrative hearing regarding their unauthorized investigation had concluded the day before, with a formal reprimand and a warning not to conduct vigilante operations in the future, delivered by a state police captain who'd then quietly shaken each of their hands and thanked them for their service. The media attention had been intense, but brief. Local firefighters' break-up animal fighting ring had dominated regional news for a week before being replaced by the next crisis. What the news hadn't captured was the quieter story, the one unfolding in Autumn's barn. Ethan found her in Midnight's stall, carefully brushing the horse's coat. 3 weeks of proper nutrition, veterinary care, and gentle handling had transformed the animal. His ribs no longer showed prominently, his coat had regained some of its natural sheen, and his eyes, those eyes that had been so hollow and desperate, now showed cautious trust. "He's looking good," Ethan said, leaning against the stall door. "Better every day." Autumn ran her hand along Midnight's neck, and the horse leaned into her touch. "Dr. Chen says he'll make a full physical recovery. The psychological recovery, that's going to take longer." "How are the others?" The others were the 3 additional horses Autumn had taken in from the rescued animals, the ones in the worst shape who needed specialized care. The county had been overwhelmed by the sheer number of animals seized, and Autumn had volunteered her farm as a temporary rehabilitation facility. Slowly improving. The mare with the infected hoof is responding to treatment. The gelding with the scarring is starting to trust people again. She set down the brush. "I got a call from the prosecutor this morning. They're building the case, using veterinary records and our documentation. Vance and his associates are looking at decades in federal prison." Good. Ethan meant it. The details that had emerged during the investigation had been horrifying. The extent of the abuse, the scope of the illegal network, the human trafficking component that had ensnared victims like Haley Carson. "How's Haley doing?" Autumn asked, as if reading his thoughts. "I talked to her social worker yesterday. She's in a secure facility, getting counseling and medical care. She's asking about Midnight. When can she visit?" "Maybe next week if she's feeling strong enough. They want to make sure she's emotionally ready." Ethan paused. She told the social worker that Midnight was the only thing that kept her sane during those 8 months, that taking care of him, even when she could barely take care of herself, gave her a reason to survive. Autumn's eyes glistened. And when she knew they were going to kill him, that Marcus Vance had decided a fighting horse who refused to fight was worthless, she risked everything to send him away. They stood in comfortable silence, watching Midnight methodically work his way through a flake of high-quality hay. The horse that had arrived at Station 47, barely able to stand, was now moving with increasing confidence. His appetite returned, his trust slowly rebuilding. "I've been thinking," Autumn said. "Once Midnight is fully recovered, once the case is completely resolved, what happens to him?" "What do you mean?" "He can't go back into the general rescue system. He's too traumatized, too high profile now. He needs someone who understands what he's been through, someone who'll give him the life he deserves." She turned to look at Ethan. "I want to adopt him officially, keep him here permanently." Ethan smiled. "I think that's exactly what he needs, what they all need." A car pulled into the driveway, Carter's new truck, replacing the one that had been totaled during the chase. Blake and Brooke climbed out carrying grocery bags. "We brought lunch," Blake called. "Figured we could all use a normal afternoon after the past 3 weeks." They set up a makeshift picnic in Autumn's barn aisle, sitting on hay bales and eating sandwiches while the rescued horses observed with curious interest. It felt surreal, the normalcy of it, after everything they'd been through. "Did you hear about Morrison?" Carter asked between bites. "Took a plea deal, 20 years in exchange for testimony against the higher-ups in the network." 20 years isn't enough, Brooke said quietly. Her cousin, who'd worked at Morrison Ranch and had first noticed the deputy's suspicious activities, had been instrumental in corroborating the investigation. Not for what he enabled. "It's a start," Carter said, "and it means the prosecutors can focus resources on the bigger fish. The FBI has already made arrests in 3 other states based on the connections they found." Ethan's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Haley Carson. The social worker gave me your number. I wanted to say thank you for saving Midnight, for believing my note, for caring enough to help. Can I visit him next week? I miss him so much." He showed the text to Autumn, who immediately responded, "This is Autumn. Midnight would love to see you. Come anytime." "You saved him first. We just helped him find his way home." The response came quickly. "He saved me too. See you soon." As afternoon stretched into evening, they took turns walking through the barn, checking on the recovering horses, marveling at how far they'd come in such a short time. The mare with the infected hoof was actually trotting in her paddock. The gelding with the scarring allowed Blake to pet his nose. And Midnight, patient, traumatized Midnight, stood calmly while Autumn brushed him, his eyes half closed in contentment. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Blake said, watching the scene. "That note. Please help him." 4 words that changed everything. 5 words, Ethan corrected gently. "Don't tell anyone where he came from. She was protecting us, even while asking for help." "She was protecting everyone," Autumn said. "The animals who couldn't speak for themselves. The people she suspected might try to help. Even Midnight. She knew that sending him away might mean never seeing him again, but she did it anyway because it was his only chance." Carter stood, brushing hay from his jeans. "You know what this whole thing taught me? That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is answer when help is asked for." They gathered their things as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Before leaving, Ethan returned to Midnight's stall one last time. The horse looked up from his hay, ears pricked forward, and took a step closer. Ethan held out his hand, and Midnight slowly, carefully, stretched his neck forward and touched his nose to Ethan's palm. Just for a moment, just long enough to say, "I remember. I trust. Thank you. See you soon, buddy," Ethan said quietly. "Haley's coming to visit next week. I think you're going to be really happy to see her." Midnight snorted softly, as if understanding, then returned to his hay. As Ethan drove away from Autumn's farm, he thought about the night Midnight had appeared at Station 47, starving, desperate, carrying a plea for help tied to his reins. He thought about Haley Carson, brave enough to sacrifice her only comfort to save an animal she loved. He thought about his crew, willing to risk everything to answer a call for help, even when it came from the most unexpected source. The news had moved on to other stories. The public attention had faded. But here, in this small corner of Millbrook County, North Carolina, healing was happening. Lives were being rebuilt, human and animal alike. Sometimes, Ethan reflected, the most important rescues weren't the ones that made headlines. They were the ones that happened in quiet moments. A horse learning to trust again, a traumatized young woman finding the courage to hope, a group of first responders remembering why they'd chosen this work in the first place. His phone buzzed one more time. A group text from Blake to the whole crew. "Just got word from the prosecutor. Final count. 247 animals rescued across 6 states. 14 human trafficking victims recovered, 31 arrests made. All because one firefighter opened the door when a horse came knocking. Carter's response came quickly. All because one girl was brave enough to ask for help, and one horse was strong enough to deliver the message. Autumn added, and because when we heard that call, we chose to answer. Ethan smiled, pulling onto the main road as the last light faded from the sky. Somewhere behind him, in a warm barn with fresh hay and clean water, midnight was settling in for the night, safe, healing, and finally home. And in a week, a young woman who'd saved his life would walk through those barn doors to be reunited with the horse who'd saved hers. It wasn't the ending anyone could have predicted 3 weeks ago, when a starving horse had appeared in the rain with a desperate note tied to his reins. But it was the ending they'd all fought for. And sometimes, Ethan thought, that made all the difference.